Adventure Bucket Wish Foundation, creating experiences directly from our grantees' bucket lists as our main focus. We foster hope and provide community, resources, and valuable knowledge to those still experiencing the symptoms and effects of the post-COVID condition, PCC. Stay tuned for how you can be involved.
Hello and welcome, listeners, to our podcast. We have a story to share with you that is unlike any story you have probably ever heard. Super juicy, super sad, super emotional. So get ready, sit back and listen up, because you're really going to be floored at this story that we're going to be sharing with you. My guest is Jeandelize Velez. And she not only has long COVID, and so does her husband. She'll talk about that. But she spent a week shy of 4 months in the hospital. So she was on an ECMO machine life support system, which is really higher level than intubation. And she was pregnant when she went in. You got to hear this. She's going to tell you all about it. So she has a little boy now that is 3. And she's just back to work. And, I don't know if she's thriving. We're going to hear about it, but I just want to introduce her and welcome her to the show. How are you?
Hi, Holly. Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure.
We're really excited to listen to your story and share it with the world so they can learn and see how serious,
Definitely.
really serious COVID was, and also how serious long COVID for us survivors. First, can I just say that people listening to this podcast, because it's new, COVID's new, right?
Yeah.
But long COVID, a lot of people don't know a lot about it. There's over 65 million documented cases. The thing I think a lot of people don't realize is our stories, because we are in the beginning of the podcast, it's going to make people feel like, oh, I shouldn't even be complaining about my issues. And maybe I don't have long COVID. Nobody has to be extreme to have long COVID. They could have just had a cold, been sick for 3 days. So I just want to preface, before you tell your story, that it doesn't have to be serious like this. Like I was serious, you were serious. I mean, we're the miracles that people don't talk about, right? That don't live to talk about.
Right.
And so with that just being said, as you hear her story, I just want you to understand that we're here to support all levels of long COVID. And this is just an extreme story that you have. So go ahead. I'm going to let you just take the wheel and share what you want to say.
Thank you. Again, my name is Jeandelize Velez. I live in Florida. On July 5th, 2020, I went in to give birth to my baby boy. I had already been diagnosed with COVID. So I was already probably, I would say, on day 7 when I went to give birth. I had all the symptoms. I had shortness of breath. I had a really horrible fevers, like bone breaking fevers, um, a cough, everything that you usually would get. I mean, it was the first wave, so it was just these really bad flu-like symptoms. And that's what honestly I thought it was. I could not imagine in my head that I was 39 weeks pregnant and I was going to catch COVID. In my head, I could not fathom that. But Lord behold, back then there was no fast testing. So I tested on a Monday and I had to wait almost till Thursday to find out that I was positive. Then that following Sunday on July 5th, I could not take it anymore. Plus, my contractions had already started. So imagine your body's already starting the process of giving birth. So that alone is painful. But on top of that, I had COVID symptoms. My husband, unfortunately, was not able to go in with me in the triage. So he just wheeled me in to the front door of the hospital. We said goodbye. And unfortunately, that was the last time I saw him for almost 3 months. I gave birth by myself. That experience alone could say was a little traumatizing. I never expected to have my first baby. We prayed for him for so long. We prepared for him for so long. And to be in that moment by myself and not in the best conditions, physically or health wise, was just very, it took a toll, honestly, mentally and emotionally and in all the ways. Even still thinking about it, I get a little bit emotional because definitely that's not the way we thought that we would bring in our baby boy. So fast forward a little bit, I stay in the hospital. My son, thank God, he goes home on July 10th. I'm still in the hospital. I thought, hey, maybe I'm one more week and I'll be out. Um, as I thought, the doctors, honestly, at that point, they couldn't treat much. I had passed that point where they wanted to give me some type of preventive medication, but I had already passed that point. Um, and because I thought I was just going to go home, anything they offered as part of like, they wanted to explore new things, new medications. I put myself in the place of, well, I'm a new mom. I don't want to explore with any new drugs. I want to go home. I don't want anything bad to happen to me. I just didn't know how bad I would get. So July 19th, so almost 2 weeks after I went into the hospital, I was intubated on July 19th. That night, probably around, I would say 12, almost 1 o'clock in the morning. So the following day, the 20th, um, I wake up to this person with a mask on my face, and I'm like, oh, like I was sleeping. I didn't notice that my oxygen levels had dropped so much. And I'm asking, and I'm like, kind of, what are you doing with a mask? And he said, well, if you don't put this on, the next step is intubation. And so you're alone in a room. I mean, it's the middle of the night. I knew my oxygen was really bad. They had me already on the highest level you can go. So I knew that eventually, if nothing worked, that's what was the next step. But to hear someone just tell you, like, next step is intubation. Mind you, Holly, I had never been hospitalized ever in my life, ever. So for me, this was just a new experience on top of being a new mom, on top of having COVID that no one knew how to treat. So that alone was just, I was full of fear, obviously. And then on top of that, they tell me that they were going to intubate. So first thing I do, I try to stay as calm as possible. Um, in my gut, in my spirit, I'm a woman of faith, so I knew that this was for it was temporary. It wasn't forever. So I couldn't talk anymore because I had the mask. I text the nurse two things. For how long is it gonna hurt? And sorry, three things. Call my husband. Like those are the three things I text her, and I still have them saved on my phone. And from there, I wrote some text that I wanted just in case, obviously, to my family members, and I left them on my phone on my notes. And that was it. Like I don't remember anything else. I wake up probably, we're already in September, so I passed my 33rd birthday in a coma, or at least waking up from the coma. My family tells me that they celebrated through FaceTime. They had a cake at home and everything for me. Then the nurses decorated my room, but I don't really remember anything. I was just out of it. Um, and then I think it was probably mid September, closer to October, when I was fully off and they weaned me completely off of all the sedatives and they started doing all of that. And that's when I really noticed how bad everything was. The first day that they stood me up and I could not hold myself. And I knew that that's when I said, oh my gosh, this is really bad. I do remember the first time I guess, realized that I was in a hospital. The first thing that came to mind you, I was hooked to everything. I had a gastric tube, a feeding tube. I had the tracheotomy. I had the ECMO that was lined right here on my neck. I had chest tubes. I had a central line. I had an IV line. I just had everything. So I'm literally just paralyzed like this, and I'm looking, and the first thing I say, what's my name? When were you born? And I just go down a list of like, okay, it's me. I'm here. And then I start thinking of like my family's members' names, and I remember, and then I think of my son. I'm like, oh my gosh, my son, like Mateo. And I just start saying his name. And that was the first time I technically woke up from just being sedated. And from there, again, they stood me up and they would wake me up every day at 5 in the morning. My day would start at 5 in the morning. And I would tell you the truth, Holly, I felt like giving up so many times because my body just couldn't take it anymore. I had gone through so much. Being on the ECMO, if I can explain a little bit, according to Google, it's the extra corporal membrane oxygenation. And it's basically a machine that functions as your lungs. So, to give your lungs a little rest for them to heal, this machine was doing the job of oxygenizing my blood and working for me, and also helping my heart too. Something I learned in the hospital is your lung and your heart are best friends, and when one is not working, the other one suffers. So in order for that not to happen, the ECMO was turned on, and I was on that for over 59, almost 60 days, fully on ECMO. I believe they took it off, if I'm not mistaken. It was right. It was still October when they removed the ECMO machine. So I was on for a very long time on it. I had to relearn how to walk while I was on ECMO. So for me to be able to stand and walk around the nurses' station, there was about 8 nurses that we needed just to do that because it was so many things that I was hooked onto. Obviously, I couldn't walk too much. I couldn't sustain myself as much. My breathing, there was a machine breathing for me also. So it was just so many things. The ECMO settings were adjusted as I was progressing. And the moments that they would lower the settings, that meant that I had to breathe for myself. That was the worst experience because my body would just go cold. Just imagine like your lungs are dormant for so long, and then they start to try to wake up and work for themselves, and then you're walking and all this oxygen needs to go everywhere, but it's like you can't breathe. Um that definitely was one of the worst times, but honestly through it all, I also had really good encounters with amazing doctors and nurses. My experience, like you said in the beginning, was not the experience of everybody. These are my case was like cases that I, obviously the floor that I was on was full of the same type of cases, but everybody's case is different. Um, some people survived, others didn't, and I just, obviously, we're thankful that we're one of those people that survived. I still go to some doctor's appointments, and when I explain to them that I was on ECMO, the doctors get it. They're like, open their eyes really wide, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I've never met someone who survived, like going into ECMO and survived." So those are the moments. I then started the process of getting off of all the tubes. They started off with the feeding tube. So I had to learn how to swallow again, how to make sure that I didn't, choke, and they didn't want anything going to my lungs. So they would do the test to make sure that that was not happening. I passed the first one, so they put me on like very mushy food, which I didn't like. I was like, in my head, I was like, this is not what food tastes like. And I didn't like it, but obviously it was like a step forward to getting full, like back into just eating normal again. Obviously my stomach shrunk because I hadn't been eating or using my stomach per se. I was on a feeding tube. Then slowly I progressed. I took off the feeding tube. They took off the gastric tube. Then I had one chest tube here and the other one on this side, on both sides. So they started taking those off. For anyone that doesn't know, those tubes are basically making sure that all the mucus, to not be gross or anything like that, all the mucus was being removed from my lungs, so they could heal faster. So, and then the last thing, I believe it was the tracheotomy. So they started capping it, which was basically put a little cap so that I could speak. I remember when I've heard my voice for the first time, um, I was super excited, but the nurses' reaction were the best because they had never heard my voice before. Because when I went into that unit, they had never heard me. And their excitement, I could see it in their faces. And mind you, I met all these wonderful nurses, but I only saw their eyes for so many weeks because they were full PPE, mask, and all of that. So I would connect to these nurses by just looking at their eyes and then looking at mine because I was usually with a mask as well. Um, and from there, I think it was a month where there was so much progress. It went from mid September to the end of October where I just progressed. Every day there was one thing they were taking off, one thing that was getting better. I did have a little regression towards like the middle of or the beginning of October. I did have pneumonia again. And that was concerning. So they were a little scared. Um, but I got past that part, and towards the end, mid October, they removed the ECMO, they removed the tracheotomy. After they had capped it, shrunk it down because they have to shrink down the size. They removed it. I actually went home with a hole here, a whole entire, excuse me, a whole entire band-aid on there. You have to just, they don't do anything to just leave it there on, and you have to take care of it at home. And then my going home story was pretty amazing too. Um, Obviously, um, be- before I say that, Holly, I forgot to say it's one thing. The doctors probably, excuse me, the doctors probably around 2.5 months, um, they wanted to surprise me. And they brought in my husband and my son as a surprise for me to meet my baby for the first time because I had not yet met him. It was definitely a surprise. They had him in the little baby carriages, like if had been a newborn. And my husband he just came in the room and pushed it down. And I saw them. It was the first time I saw them for the first time since July 5th. And for him, my baby, the first time ever. So I was really excited. They did have me a little bit sedated. So inside I was like crying and had all these emotions, but on the outside you really can't see much of it. But I know, God knows how excited I was to finally see and touch my baby's hands and see how big and chunky he was and healthy, which was the best thing that could happen because then that just gave me that extra oomph, that extra determination to like, I need to get out of here.
Yep.
And a little sad because I wanted to go home with them, but I couldn't. So then fast forward again to when they were discharging. I was supposed to be discharged the beginning of November, which would have hit my 4 month mark. But a week before, my doctor, the main doctor, had a group of like, I was like 10, 12 doctors. But the main doctor that had my case, she came in, she sat down, and she started to cry. And I was like, why are you crying? Am I okay? Is anything wrong? She's like, do you want to go home? And I was like, yeah, of course. And in my head, she's like, she's being extra nice. Like, I know, like, I'm going home eventually, in my head. She's like, no, do you want to go home today? And I'm like, what do you mean today? I'm supposed to go to rehab next week. She's like, no, no, no. I think we've talked. All the doctors have talked. You have been cleared from like your, cardiac. Your cardiologist cleared you. Your pulmonologist cleared you. Like you've been cleared. So you can actually do rehab at home. And we think that for your mental state, for everything, your mental health, it's the best thing to go see your baby, be around your family. It's like, do you want to go home today? And honestly, to tell you the truth, Holly, at first I was super happy with the notion of going home. And then all of a sudden it kind of turned to this pit in my stomach of fear because I was leaving a bubble that I was in for the last almost 4 months where if anything happened, there was care like right there. And to think that anything could happen with my oxygen, with anything and not have that immediately, that scared me. So I actually called my husband and I told him, I was excited on the phone, but at the same time, I was like, do you really think I should go home? He's like, do what you want to do, but I would love for you to come home today. Like, I'll go get you right now if you want me to. So I was like, okay, I think I want to go home. So then everything was prepared, started to be prepared for me to leave that day. It was a Wednesday, October 28th. And I called my mom. I couldn't wait. I wanted to surprise her at home. But I think if I would have surprised her, I think she might have had a heart attack or something. I didn't want that. It was too much. I know that us as survivors, we get a brunt of what COVID was, but our families members also get a very different perspective, because they have to go through a different side of it, watching us suffer and go through everything that we've gone through. So, you know, I wanted to tell her and not scare her at the same time. So I did call her. She was working. And the same thing, I told her, I was like, hi, mom. And obviously my voice was very like thin, like very low at that point because I still couldn't speak that much. And I told her, I was like, I'm coming home. And she's positive. She's like, oh, yeah, baby, you're coming home. I know. She's like, no, no, no. I'm coming home tonight. And she started to cry. She's like, oh my gosh, don't tell me that. And I was like, yes, I'm coming home. The doctors cleared me and I can go home. And from there, they discharged me. But that night, again, it's the whole leaving the bubble. Obviously, we also go through this traumatic event and we have a sort of like this PTSD from it. Um, my oxygen machine they gave me, they loaned me a portable one. For some reason, it didn't work on the way to my mom's house. It stopped working right when we got there. And I freaked out. My husband freaked out, and I was like, just take me back to the hospital. Like, I can't deal with this. Um, they brought me the same company brought another oxygen machine, but it was just the experience of, I'm happy I'm home. I'm so excited to be with my baby, but I've gone through this traumatic experience and I just wanted to be in a safe space. And at that point, even though it's your family, it's your safe space, you don't feel like that because of how bad you've had it. And that's how I felt at that moment. And it took me probably a week or two to adjust to being home, to sleeping. I would tell my husband every night, I was like, can you check on me at night to make sure that I'm breathing? Please check on me to make sure that nothing's wrong, that I don't like go in my sleep. It was to that point. And it's, I think about it. Sometimes I get emotional because, that should not be what you're doing in the first couple of months of your baby's life. And he had to be a mom, a dad, my parents, my sister, they all had to step in and be part of my son's life. And it's not what we expected at all for his first couple of months of 6 months of life. But honestly, it's a tough memory, but also a beautiful one at the same time, because I did make it. I'm here. I went home. I went to cuddle my baby. He remembered my voice from our FaceTimes from the hospital. And that alone just filled me up with so much emotion. And I still get teary eyed about it because that's who I fought for the entire time. Um, Obviously, I wanted to go home to my husband and to my family, but I had not met this life that I made. And I fought through it all. Our bodies are an amazing machine. Sometimes, they give up, but it was such a um, it was a mental fight. It was a physical fight. It was a spiritual fight. It was like I was fighting on all fronts at one point with myself, not giving up. There was a lot of tough conversations between me and God. Again, like I said, I'm a woman of faith, but sometimes I felt like it wasn't enough. When your body's hurting, when the doctors keep coming in. I remember one time I told the doctor, what else? And I cried. I was like, what else do you want me to do? Like, my body can't give you anything else. I can't do it anymore. And it was tough. I had tough nights, but along those tough nights, I had glimpses of hope. and of a lot of amazing people next to me. Those nurses were like my family. They would hug me, they would cheer me on, they would get in my face when I didn't want to like walk, which I needed to walk in order to be cleared and get off ECMO. They would tell me, you need to go home. I was like, do you see that baby on that wall? Like, you need to go home to him. Like, we love you, but you need to leave. So I did, through the entire storm and the process of it, I did have still those little glimpses of faith and hope through it all. And through sharing my story, that's all I've always wanted to get out, is that, we are long haul COVID people, if we want to call ourselves that. And we will unfortunately have to deal with a lot of these um, colds and coughs and these random things that happen to our bodies that doctors call autoimmune now because they don't really have a name for them. But at the end of the day, I also have to be so thankful again that I'm here, that I wasn't one of the people that left, and that I get to enjoy life in a second rebirth, I call it, of life. And I want to just for people to know that if you have a family member who might be going through COVID or any other illness that is, as bad or worse, there is hope. Just keep on to your faith, keep on to your hope. See in the little things, just find hope in those little moments. um, and that's all I wanted to share about my story. And I get emotional, I'm sorry. um, I hope that if it just touches one life and that one life can just find hope through my story, I think there's been purpose behind my suffering and what I went through. So I hope someone can find that hope.
Oh, I'm sure. And it makes me emotional too because so much of your story is so relatable because I lived so much of that myself. The blessing I had was that I was a year and a half behind you and I was able to have one person every 24 hours. And even though my husband couldn't come see me for about 3.5 weeks, I had a sister, well, two sisters and a daughter most of the time. I had a couple other people as well, but so I always had 24/7 someone
That's
with me, which
amazing.
I know saved my life,
Yeah.
not only physically but mentally, and spiritually, and all rounds. And so you're right. I mean, there's so much suffering that people, you have the survivor's guilt because,
We
why
do.
you and so many others, didn't make it, but the PTSD is real, the anxiety, the depression, all the stuff that comes along with it. I mean, I can't even imagine, yours was so much more intense even than mine. When people say they can't believe mine wasn't so intense, I get it, and having a baby on top of that and then recovering from
Yeah.
that and all the hormones. And I mean, I really can't even imagine worse than what I was because me and God had a lot of talks too.
Mm,
And there were many days I just prayed to die. I didn't want to go through that.
yeah.
It's like and you're with all of the things on your body. I mean, you had more than I did. That's what I'm saying. I'm like, oh, I have pictures of how much stuff was hooked up to
Mm,
me. You even had more. And it's like, it's horrible. It's like, yeah, just put me in a coma because I don't want to deal with that. But
yeah.
what I'd like
It's
to, oh,
frustrating. It's frustrating when
yeah,
you start looking at yourself and you think of who you were and of the abilities you had. And that's one thing you start thinking of, like, oh my gosh, breathing. Why did I ever take that for granted? Walking. I never thought I would take walking for granted. Learning how to breathe. I literally needed therapy to learn how to move my stomach as I breathe because I was breathing from my chest. So I would get
mhm,
occupational therapy just to help me learn, like, okay, when you breathe, your belly should go up and down, up and down. And my belly could not do that anymore because I had not used those muscles for so
right.
long that my body got used to breathing. I would breathe like, and you would see my shoulders, they would move up and down. And I even had to learn how to breathe again, which is to me mind
Yeah,
boggling because it's such an
I think that's
involuntary
natural.
thing that we do. So,
Yeah, it is. Well, you're learning to everything, breathe, walk, talk.
yeah.
I mean, everything is new. And when your body lays there, I remember my muscles just being like jello. It just, you hadn't used them. And
At the
in
end, my
fact,
back was hurting so bad.
mhm,
Yeah.
yeah, I felt like no one could ever figure out a couple of my things, but after, like, I was like someone had pulled a sword right through, in between my breast from my back. Like they were just, it
Yeah.
was just almost like it was so bruised and nobody could ever tell me what that was. But I remember just barely even touching the hairs on the top of
Yeah.
my head and the nerve
I lost
endings.
a
And
lot
it
of
was
my
just,
hair. A lot of my
oh
hair
yeah,
fell out.
yeah,
Obviously because I had, so the ECMO, I know I can show them. So this was where this part of my chest, of my neck, sorry. This is where the ECMO was. So it's
okay.
this very thick tube. Then they place it, it's a cannula. They place it here, but they anchored it. So it's right here. They anchored it right close to it. Then it would go around my head, then down. So they would anchor it here with another like clip thing and down my leg. So at the beginning, it was on closer to my groin area. But in
Mhm.
order to make me mobile, they had to switch it. So each time
Oh,
that was, I would have to go into the OR for them to change it. So on top of that is I still find out things that happen to my body that to this day that I didn't know happened. I found out months after, probably a year after that I was airlifted from one hospital to the other because I was that sick. So I'm yet to grasp sometimes the magnitude of everything I've
yeah.
gone through. And to tell you the truth, I don't know if this happens to you, Holly, but sometimes I even think, I'm like, was this even real? Like, I don't, sometimes I look back, I was like, did this really happen to me? Like, it feels so surreal. Like, surreal's not even the word. If there's another word that just means that I cannot believe this happened in, I know it did, but it just feels like it didn't. I still can't comprehend the magnitude of everything I went through and the fact that I'm still here. Only
Mm,
but by the grace of God, I can say, because I can't comprehend how I'm here. The doctors told my husband many times, she's not gonna make it past tonight. So many times my husband got that call throughout the whole process. And for
mhm,
me to be here, I do have long COVID. That is obviously a symptom from me being in the hospital for so long. I get sick easily. I do hold on to sickness a little longer than before. I think my immune system just trying to, come back from it. I had what you call ITP last year, which is where your platelets drop really low, and you get like these dots on your legs, these red dots. And at the beginning, I thought it was I have some like rash on my legs, but then I noticed some red bruising on my hands without having any like hitting them or anything like that. I go to the doctor. Oh, it's ITP. They put me, and it's all autoimmune things that I've never had in my life, but after COVID, it's just been one thing on top of another.
yeah,
And I do have a toddler at home, and like we were talking off the air that he brings everything home from school, and before mentioning my husband, um, my husband and we've been together for over 10 years, and he never got sick before COVID, never. And now we catch everything, him and I both. um Everything that comes home that my son, whether it's a cold, whether anything, just anything, and it just lasts for so long. Right now, I know you could guys can hear it in my voice. I have like, and it's asthma and a cough and just congestion, and it's been there for almost 2 weeks, and I've tried everything. um Allergies out of nowhere, asthma that came back from when I was a little girl, now I have it all the time again. So just a lot of things that I know you've experienced, and you still experience things after COVID. But it's something we have to learn how to deal with, and unfortunately talk more about, like what we're
yeah.
doing right now. Honestly,
How much did you tell me your hospital bill was?
so I'm gonna round numbers. Um, One hospital, which was the first hospital, where not the delivery because that was covered by my insurance. Just my stay, the 2 weeks. and the intubation and all that, about 1.3 million. And then the 4 months, almost 4 months, the 3.5 weeks or so, um, 3 million.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy. Wow. Well, we're just glad you're here to talk about it and tell us a story.
Yeah.
And your husband agreed, right, to come and be one of our guests to be. I want to interview not just for long COVID, but I want to. It's like he can come give us the rest of the story,
Yeah,
but from
definitely.
the
He has a
caretaker.
different perspective for sure because he was home changing diapers and feeding a new toddler, I mean a newborn. So he's
Yes.
and advocating for me 100% of the time. He did. That's something that if anyone's listening to this, if you do have a family member in the hospital, one of the biggest advices I can give you is advocate for them. My
Mm.
husband advocated for me day and night. He knew my medications. He knew my diet. He knew my doctors. He would call every like 2 or 3 hours to the hospital. If I told him I didn't like a medication, how it made me feel, he would call immediately like, she doesn't like that. It doesn't make her feel well. What can we do? Can you get her out of it? Can you change it? So that's like one of the biggest things that I would like a takeaway was advocate for your family member at all times. And he did that. So his story is definitely very different from mine.
Yeah, we'll get him as one of the caretaker weeks here shortly. So stay tuned for that, everybody. And the other thing I would add to the advocacy, you'll hear me say it all the time on the show because I believe in it so much, is to advocate after they get out of the hospital. So whether it
100%.
be grabbing your cell phone and taking it with you if you have to go to a doctor appointment and
Yeah.
recording it, make there needs to be accountability for those doctors because they're inundated. And honestly, we're their test subjects, right? They don't have all this data. We are their data. And so they're learning as they go. COVID's new for everybody, even though it's almost 4 years old now. It's just a new disease. And so it's not going away. It's different variations. You may not have had COVID bad, like we said, but still could have long COVID. You
Mhm.
may have long COVID and not realize that you had COVID, it wasn't bad, and now all these things are manifesting in your body. There's over 200 symptoms that are identified with COVID. And so people that have long COVID, there might just be something that's popped up and you're like, whoa, okay, so that's part of the long COVID we're talking about. And part of our mission for our nonprofit is to educate people and help them understand, advocate for them, and get more help because a lot of the doctors, almost everyone with long COVID probably has a nightmare doctor story. There is great care and for some, and others they just don't ever hit the mark of the right place to go.
I
There are
do have
special
one, and I
workers.
wish I would have gone into it.
You would say that again?
I do have one, and it was post the hospital stay. And I mean, I don't know if I have time to go into it. It's just really quick. Do I have time,
Yeah,
Holly?
yeah, let's do it.
Um, I had the ITP problem
Hmm.
with my platelets. I was already gonna go to a doctor in with my provider in the hospital where I was going to. But I ended up going to a nearby hospital, so they assigned me a new doctor. And I went to her. She had seen me in the hospital, so I went to her. I followed up with her. She put me on a prednisone regimen for obviously an autoimmune disease that nope, she didn't know. They literally told me, "Oh, this is just your body attacking itself. That's all I can tell you." And I was like, "Okay, sure." That's what I guess they tell you. And I'm by no means bashing doctors because doctors saved my life. And so that's not what I'm doing. I'm saying there are instances where you do need to, like you said, advocate for yourself and know um if your body's telling you, your mind is telling you this is not the doctor for you, you should definitely run for the hills.
Yeah.
And that's what happened to me that day. She had put me on a regimen. I go the following week because I was going to check with her every week. Within a week, she wanted to see all this change, which is not what we spoke about. We said within a month, if the platelet levels don't, balance out or a little bit average to normal, then we will think about what else we can do. I go in a week later. Long story short, she tells me I should go on chemo.
Oh, wow.
I had gone through this horrible traumatic event. Um, I'm susceptible, like my emotions are just susceptible to all things. I leave her office crying, just bawling. I'm like, oh my gosh, chemo. She mentioned chemo. Like, oh my goodness. I was like, I'm never going back to her. I like this horrible, like, feeling in my gut. And I was like, this is not right. This is what she's telling me is not true. I go back to the initial doctor that I was supposed to go to, and he's like, who told you that? Um, and he's like, no, there's actually medication for what you have if we were to get to that point. But right now, we're just going to treat you the regular way with steroids to make sure that the inflammation goes down and your body goes back to. And it was like a totally like different thing. I was like, how can two doctors be telling me two different things? Imagine if I would have gone back to her. I would have
Yeah.
went on chemo. And then she tells me, well, it's not the bad chemo. So yeah, to your point, there are doctors out there. Again, like I said, I'm not here to bash doctors.
Mm.
Um, I'm just saying you do have to advocate for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Mine told me before he told me I had a pulmonary fibrosis diagnosis, he told me we should talk about getting you on a lung transplant list. I mean, that's what he started with.
Well,
And I was just like, wait, what? That was where I say the advocate is so important to have somebody take notes, keep a journal,
yes.
I mean, I have a medical binder. It's thick too.
Yeah.
You know,
I was
so you
I
have all your,
I was on a long transplant like the beginning of my stay in the hospital. One of the days that I was already awake, I do this woman dressed in PPE, but her PPE was different. It was like a yellow color. Um, and I was like, okay, this is so different. She comes to me, she's like, oh, I'm from the transplant team. And you're
yeah,
like, okay, I was told I'm getting better, but you're from the transplant team. Like, what does this mean? And again, one of those instances where if you have a family member outside that is advocating for you, it's key because as soon as she left the room, my husband had gotten me an iPad where I can communicate with them at all times. So I called him immediately. I was like, listen, someone from a transplant team came here. Like, I don't understand. I'm scared because they told me earlier today I was getting better, and now there's someone here from transplant. Like, I do not understand. So he called and got clarity. Obviously, they were following my case just in case there was a need for it.
mhm.
But the advocating for me was the key point because if not, I would have not known what they were doing. They explained a little bit, but I was so medicated still.
Yeah, for a while. Oh gosh, well, what a story. I mean, we're so glad you made it here, and there's obviously a purpose for what we need to do in this world, and your little boy needs you, and I'm glad you're here to raise him. It's always nice to have a good ending, right?
Yes, 100%. And I know that was not the the ending that everybody got. So I do want
Mhm,
to, be mindful of that. If anyone's hearing this and one of your family members didn't make it,
mhm.
I'm very sorry. And from my heart, I know my family went through a really hard time having me in the hospital, so that I can only imagine what losing someone through COVID was. So my heart goes out to you too.
And not being able to see them and say goodbye, like, that just breaks my
Correct.
heart 'cause that's where
Yeah.
I was lucky. I had that help, and
Mhm.
I know I'm alive
Yeah.
because I had them there advocating for me, so, so important. Okay, wow, we need to leave it on a high note.
I know. I know. I'm sorry. That was a downer.
And we have this going video and audio, so, I know when she was pointing to her where they did her, echo, you wouldn't have seen that, but you can go to YouTube and watch it there, or you can just listen to it like you're doing now. But
Yeah.
thank you so much. We're gonna be following up with your husband to get not the rest of the story, just his side of the story,
All right.
and
Definitely.
and then to see how he is with his long COVID and things because he's in two roles, long COVID and a caretaker role, and
Yeah.
double caretaker with the baby. So yeah, I can't even imagine what he must have been going through. So I'm excited to interview him and see, where he was in that thought process. But thank
Hmm.
you for being here, and thank you for being you and making a difference in the world.
Thank you for having me, and I wish you all the best with this endeavor. What you're doing is something not everybody has stepped out to do, so I wish you all the best.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you, listeners, for being here. And we'll see you on the next one. And to be continued. Bye for now.
Bye.
Adventure Bucket Wish Foundation, creating experiences directly from our grantees' bucket lists as our main focus. We foster hope and provide community, resources, and valuable knowledge to those still experiencing the symptoms and effects of the post-COVID condition, PCC. Stay tuned for how you can be involved.